Hello and welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. My name is Matt Jertson, and I have a little bit of a confession to make. I wasn't as on the ball with scheduling of guests as I normally am, and so we have a bit of a break in the programming this week. So I thought what I would do instead is share with you an episode of a different podcast that I co-host. For those of you who aren't aware, there's another podcast called VHTB, which stands for a VC headhunter and trainer walk into a bar. I co-host it with Brian and Seika Major of Ad Astra Talent Advisors and Justice Killian of Space Capital. Given what they focus on and what I focus on, the show talks about what I like to say is kind of the softer side of the hard tech startup ecosystem. So we talk about, what are the talent challenges, the leadership challenges, the financing challenges that make companies successful, not focusing on, the actual technical issues and the neat technology. There's lots of coverage of that. So we like to kind of cover the other side of the coin. If you enjoy this podcast, I'm sure you will enjoy that podcast. So make sure you check it out. I'll make sure there is a link to the show in the description of this episode. In this discussion, what we focus on is something that I've honestly been talking a lot about, and I think about it a lot having worked at SpaceX, is what is the line between pushing people and just being an asshole, right? As a leader, it is your job to try to get the most out of people. You always want to push them forward. You always want to expect a lot, but that can certainly go too far. And so we get everyone's opinion on kind of what that line is based on who they've worked with, where they've worked before, what they've seen in organizations. So it's a really great discussion. I hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to VHTB, your guide to the talent, culture, and capital forces shaping the hard tech startup ecosystem. My name is Matt Jertson from Better Everyday Studios. We are a leadership development company focused on training the next generation of hard tech leaders solving the world's hardest problems. I am joined today by Brian Major of Ad Astra Talent Advisors. How are you doing, Brian?
Doing great. Looking forward to the conversation.
Excellent. And of course, Justice Killian as well from Space Capital. How are things on the East Coast, Justice? Are you buried in snow?
It's been cold. You can't see it out my window, but we've had about 2 feet of snow and it's been a month of frozen winterland. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about something spicy today.
Yeah, a little bit. We're kind of continuing the discussion that we've been having for the last couple episodes where really, honestly, what we're talking about is personalities, right? And especially the personalities at the top of companies. And the take that I had on this that I've been thinking about a lot recently, I would summarize in, what is the line between pushing people to do their best work and just being an asshole, right? Because I think it can be kind of a fine line. And I've been thinking a lot about this because of a podcast interview that I listened to of Casey Handmer, who's the founder of a company called Terraform Industries. I probably get the sentiment kind of wrong, but in a recent podcast interview he was talking about how when he joined Terraform, when he started Terraform, one of the things that he's kind of shifted in his understanding of leadership is just, it takes a lot to get people to really push themselves. And I think if we look at the broader world, like this makes sense. If you look at sports coaches, a lot of sports coaches have a lot of footage of them yelling really loudly at their athletes. And so clearly there is a sense that even in the most driven of people, it still takes a lot to get the most out of them. And so I just wanted to spend a minute kind of, especially since we've been talking about these personalities, getting your sense of from both of you when the companies you work with, and for, Brian, in your case, building your own company, where do you see that line?
I can jump in. When we're dealing with, orbital mechanics and high voltage systems and, defense systems, like leaders have to be uncompromising on the standards. This is just a very different game than, just building software. If something goes wrong, the mission fails, like people can get hurt, people's lives are at stake. And so, I understand why there, is this sort of higher standard or higher threshold or sort of higher expectation for people operating in this hard tech ecosystem. I think the line gets crossed when leaders make friction about a person rather than the physics. You really need to attack the problem viciously, but like you need to respect, the engineer, you need to respect the person, you need to, work alongside them to help them accomplish that. And that to me is like that fine line that you start to cross. And when you start to become sort of that person that, is an asshole.
I want to come back to that idea of like the focusing on kind of the person versus the physics of the problem. But Brian, you're talking to people all the time. I know I've heard both you and Sega kind of describe, sometimes somebody calls you up and they're just like, I want people who are going to work 80 hours a day and they've gotten all this experience and they're ready to just devote their lives to this thing. So how do you see kind of that line manifesting itself in the leaders that you work with?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, people will work really hard if they want to, right? Like, and if they think it's getting them closer to something they want to achieve. And so if you just want people to work harder just to serve your own like outcome, and they're not bought into what that outcome is, it's not going to go anywhere. They might do it to get that paycheck or to get you off their back that one time, but like they're not going to stay and they're not going to keep giving you their all at each turn. So I think that's a really, really key piece. I mean, we talk about vision a lot, and I think it comes up a lot because that's just how important it is. If you have a vision that people want to work towards, that they believe is attainable, that is really motivating to them. And it can't be something that's just cool. Like there's a ton of cool stuff that people can work on. They need to be bought into that specific thing and believe that they individually can make a real impact at it. And that you also believe that they are capable of it too, is another piece. I think that's like the respect element that Justice was speaking to as well. Like coaches are yelling at their players because they believe they're able to do better and they want to light a fire and then to enact some change. And so these are, I think, some of the key elements that need to be present. Otherwise, it's just going to come out sideways. People aren't going to do it just because you yelled at them.
I think there's a really important sort of nuance. You're using some interesting words about like lighting a fire and motivation and, vision. And, when you start to peel away some of those words, what you're looking at is these are sort of tools that help create a self-motivation, right? A desire to want to see a mission through. And when it's sort of imposed and people aren't aligned and it's sort of a one-off to appease, whoever's sort of barking at me or whoever's, whatever my bonus looks like. And so how do you create that culture, that environment, that trust that allows self-motivation to flourish and a culture of self-starting? So I don't know, that was just something that felt like it was maybe a layer down from some of the words that you were using that felt like it was worthy pulling out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. Like at our company, like one of the things that we're looking for in who we hire is like, do your batteries come pre-installed? Like, do you have a history of self-motivation and high drive? Because if you haven't demonstrated that at any point in your life, it's unlikely that you're just going to come in and then all of a sudden become that person. And we also similarly speak to like this image of a duck where it's like calm and cool above the water, but like under that duck is kicking and paddling super hard. Like, do you have the ability to like be really stabilizing and also super high drive?
Everybody gets motivated in different ways. I think that's, going back to this recruiting idea as well. It's like, that's why in recruiting, it's probably so important that you make it really clear who you are and what kind of company you are. There are people who, as long as they know like it's real and as long as they know it's serving a mission, like they can get yelled at all day long. They can have every mistake pointed out to them and it does nothing but like get them more excited and they want to prove themselves and it just feeds their fire. And for other people, it's just going to destroy them and they need a completely different style. And so I'm sure the more you can make that clear, and I think this is it. And smaller companies is maybe going to be the whole org is operating the same way. But then once you get to larger companies, maybe different teams and different leaders are serving their people in different ways. But the more you can make clear kind of how you operate as a team, it makes sure that you're bringing in people who are fueled in the right way. One really interesting dichotomy that I wanted to point out, kind of this come up in this discussion, is when you were talking about pointing out problems or criticizing or driving things, it was like one of the things you mentioned was the importance of not focusing on the problem, but focusing on the physics, right? It's like the physics is what we're trying to, not focusing on the person, but focusing on the physics. Yeah. And not personalizing kind of the critique. Whereas when we talk about like kind of the motivational side of things, it's all about the personal, right? It's all about making sure things really are true to that person. Does that sound, it's almost like the praise in public, criticize in private kind of thing. Is that a right dichotomy of like when the motivation needs to be the personal and then the criticisms need to be more like of the problem? I don't know. Is that a dichotomy that makes sense?
I buy that. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really hard for us not to take feedback in a personal way. And so if the information you're receiving is personal in nature, like you're not doing this right, even the most trained, self-aware people, there's still a lot of dissonance that, can happen from that. And so to be effective, to feel like you got your back, like ideally a leader comes alongside you and helps like unpack that problem. And it creates this sort of view that, managers and leaders do have your back. Right. And it sort of leads me, to Kim Scott's radical candor. And to me, the essence of that is really, you can push people as hard as absolutely possible, but only if like they genuinely feel care about as humans, right? Like they believe that you've got them. Right. And so if you're just a cog in the wheel and like you're just being degraded all the time because you didn't do something in the right way, I mean, you're not going to be motivated. That intrinsic motivation is going to just be crushed, And I don't put that responsibility solely on your manager, but a good manager, a good leader fosters that as opposed to crushes it.
Yeah. I think to really bring this home, one of the questions that I love to pose to both of you is, what have you seen are the ramifications of consistently crossing that line? Have you, I can imagine this turns into high turnover or really difficulty with hiring or just lots of, I think the latest Gallup study shows that something like 32% of workers are not just disengaged, but actively disengaged, which means they're fighting against the company. What have you seen? Have you seen ramifications of people going too far too often?
I mean, for sure. And I would imagine that our industries, it's not nearly that bad because we have so many people who are intrinsically motivated and mission motivated. But I think that's likely true across like the entire like US workforce for sure. I think that you can't really get away with being an asshole if it's not part of the company culture to speak in that certain way. And if people don't respect you, like just people aren't going to stay. There's why would they? There's a million places that they could go. And a lot of them are really great options and would welcome them with open arms. But if you've hired them into a clear culture of like, hey, we fight openly and then we disagree and commit and we still have tons of respect for each other and we move forward. You do that in an open way and you adhere to how you present the company culture and it's ultimately still healthy, even if in some small moments it looks a little chaotic. I think it can work. Like, I don't think there is, a clear definition of this is the right culture. And 100%. So it's more important that you're ultimately have a high trust team that respects each other and has a mutual understanding of how to motivate each other and solve problems in an aligned, respectful way.
Listen, I believe that there is an asshole tax to actually get big things done, particularly when you're trying to disrupt the status quo. Like, you're just going to, create friction with some amount of people. And if that's what you're signing up for, like, to really change a system, there's going to be people that are offended, insulted. It's going to be a challenge. And so Brian's point on the culture needs to understand that. People need to understand what they're opting into. That's where I think the friction, like, that drives turnover comes from. If it's like a passive aggressive type, being a jerk, like, that doesn't work. It needs to be explicit, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be known. People need to be aligned. And ultimately, I think what the way people are able to thrive in that environment is to believe in what they're doing and actually see the fruit of what their efforts materialize into something. Like they need to be able to push something forward. If you're constantly being shut down, if your ideas are never heard, if you don't feel that's an important one, to actually feel heard, right? To feel heard and to feel like you're being contributing. That people can grind and sort of be in a tough environment for a long period of time if you actually feel valued. And I think being heard and feeling like you're contributing is a very critical way of feeling valued.
I wouldn't say that I ever really worked for any assholes, but I worked at SpaceX, and I think a lot of people would call Elon an asshole. And there's some of that culture there, and it came with like a really high bar of execution, and knowing that if you weren't going to hit that high bar, you would be called on it. Right. I think that was the expectation that I knew going into it, and I felt it around me, and I heard stories of the things that Elon did or other people did, and knew that could happen to me as well. And I think that I never worked harder than in a job before that than I did at SpaceX. And it actually brought something out of me that I didn't necessarily know was in me. Like when I'd worked at these other companies before, there just wasn't much of that push.
Yeah.
And so to have that, it was a little bit like having that coach yell at you, even if it wasn't directly to you. And it was like, oh, I can rise to this occasion. And so I definitely don't want to fully villainize the asshole here.
And I think the good way to wrap this up, what I'm hearing is that, because we're talking about where is the line between pushing people and going too far. I think what I'm hearing is that the line moves, and it moves in very subtle ways, and sometimes subtle, sometimes not subtle ways for a few clear reasons. Is it consistently applied? Right? Do I think that they yell at that person and not at this person? Do they always yell at me? If I feel that it's a consistent bar, like you were just saying, Brian, then the line moves. If I'm really bought into the mission and really care about it deeply, then the line moves. If my leader has shown that they care about me and I feel heard, then the line moves. If this anger and vitriol is aimed at the physics and the problem versus people, then the line moves. And so it's really thinking through the holistic picture of what is the culture of our organization and how do all of these things interact, versus trying to say this is the line. Once you cross it, you're an asshole. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in a seat, the bar is at some point, at some level for that seat. If you're underperforming to that seat and you're below that bar, if no one tells you, and I'm not saying you have to be an asshole to tell them, there's other ways of doing it too, but if no one tells you that, and then they just kind of quietly move you to another role or fire you, they don't give you the feedback, they don't motivate you somehow, they're not actually doing you any service, right? Yeah. So the point here is to see if you're below the bar, you're actually receiving useful feedback and information to know that there's a gap that needs to be. And I think that's really, really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think ultimately for any manager out there trying to think about what they're doing, it sounds like it really comes down to just are the things I'm doing the best way to drive performance forward? And really thinking through that question, because there's a lot of different factors to that, but that's how you can really decide which side of the line you're on. Where on one side, you're really driving performance. On the other side, you're just kind of venting emotions.
Am I doing this in a way that aligns with the culture of the company and that aligns with the motivations and the personality of the individual? If both those things are true, you're definitely not being an asshole.
Yeah. Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the discussion. I look forward to seeing whether or not the algorithms flag this episode on YouTube as explicit. I don't know how they work. And I think this is the first time we've ever had any kind of discussion that might happen. So I'm excited to see what happens. And I'm excited to talk to both of you next time. So thank you.
I know. Can I share this one with my parents? We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Okay. See you guys.